Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to be tackling a very, very big show. We're going to be taking a look at Alien Earth by Noah Hawley, which continues with the Alien legacy. It's set a few years before the events of the first Alien movie by Ridley Scott, starring Sigourney Weaver. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We're slowly growing our audience, so if we can kind of pick up the pace a little bit, that'd be great. We're pumping out new content every week, so if you can, just just give us a like, just let us know you're digging the content, and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. It's pretty affordable, it's cheap, and it keeps you in the loop, lets you know what we're up to, because every day of the week we're putting out something new. Now, Alien Earth is one of those shows that we were a bit apprehensive about. We did a trailer reaction a few months ago. Check that out. There should be a link for that. And it's quite intensive because it's 8 episodes and there's a lot to get into. So over the next 8 weeks, every Friday will be a review of each episode of that. So it's something for you to take a look at during the holidays, just because we're going to Thanksgiving and Christmas after that and into New Year. But just a few things to get out of the way before we dive in. So over the next few weeks, like I said, we'll be reviewing an episode of Alien Earth, but the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we will be doing another double header. We will be doing our reaction to the Anaconda trailer, which drops on Christmas Day. And then the Robot will be doing his review of the original movie. And then Christmas Day, we will be doing a review of Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, which we have been putting it off, over and over again. But we finally decided we should at least review it before the year's out. And that will be another double header too, because the Robot will be reviewing Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, because oddly enough, that's the only Mission Impossible movie he's never seen. And then starting around January, we will be diving into movies that are in the running for the Oscars in March. And then season 5 will end with our roundtable discussion of what we think will happen and which movies will probably clinch the coveted Academy Awards. And then season 6 will be a few weeks after that. So there's a lot going on the channel over the next few weeks. It's going to be a nice respite for us because we've been working nonstop since September. So it'll be nice to have the next 2 to 3 weeks off to just sit back and relax and just enjoy Thanksgiving.
Wait, is it only 2 to 3 weeks? Is it only 2 to 3 weeks?
Well, I mean, it is for me, but okay. I know for you it's going to feel a little bit longer just because there really is very little for you to do. So Alien Earth, Lee, this has been something that we have been discussing and that we have been taking a look at. I know you took some time off to kind of reacquaint yourself with this series. I waited until all the episodes were out to basically do what any normal person does in 2025 and binge watch the entire thing. Now for me, I had to watch it out of order just because there was one episode, and we'll get to that later on, where it was a flashback. And for me, it's a pet peeve of mine because anytime you invest 3 to 4 episodes getting people involved in the storyline and in the world in which that story is set, you kind of want to keep the flow going. So if you interrupt it with a flashback episode, it kind of throws everything off kilter. So
that's interesting. I did not know that about you. That's interesting. I will say, right, and obviously I know we'll talk about that later. I think it does kind of give Morrow, right, his character, very different, I guess, understanding of his motivations.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting if you felt like that kind of threw anything off for you.
For me, I kind of feel like it would be better if they kind of like interwove it throughout the
of course,
episodes. Yeah, because at least that way kind of leaves you breadcrumbs. You can kind of start picking up things as it goes on instead of just giving it us into one fell swoop.
That's very fair. That's very fair. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, over the next 8 weeks, this pretty much covers us for most of the holiday weekends, which we will no doubt be celebrating while these episodes are running. So Lee, without further ado, go ahead and take us into Alien Earth by Noah Hawley.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've said on the channel before, right? I guess I'll just reiterate at the start, right? I find the first two Alien movies, right? Alien and Aliens, to be some of the best movies, not only the genre, but just overall, right? I love those films. They're fantastic. They do very different things, with one being kind of like the original and being more focused on kind of like the scares and the horror. Whereas the second one does a lot more with the action, the suspense, but it's just, I think both the films do such a great job, right? So I've always been a huge fan of the Alien franchise. With that being said, there's been some inconsistency in the quality work that's come out. I know we talked about Alien Romulus, and I think that there was some things that worked very well, some things that maybe didn't work very great. But I think it was a fun addition into the franchise. So this, like you pointed out, right, this takes place right chronologically, right before the Alien movie, right, the original one. So kind of a fun thing that this is in essence a prequel, right? As far as everything goes, and really the fact that I feel like they put so much effort into that reasoning, because if you watch the opening, right, the opening feels every little bit of how I would remember, or how you remember the first Alien film, right? You got kind of that really unique text crawl that it does, where it's like introducing the title. The sets, they look exactly like they would, or like they were in the original film. Some of the music and the stings that happen are just like in the first one. And I like how they kind of like montage of the whole crew coming together and kind of sitting around as they get out of cryo sleep. So there's a lot of really cool callbacks. And
I mean, Noah Hawley did do his homework.
Yes.
You can compliment him on that. And
Absolutely.
I will say this too, because Noah Hawley has adapted a lot of popular franchises into television form. He's kind of, if you think about it, he's kind of following the Nolan format, where he's dipping his toe into different genres, right? So for me, my introduction to Noah Hawley was when he did Legion, which was an offshoot of the X-Men universe, which at that time was still owned by Fox. And he did the he did the adaptation of Fargo, which we reviewed earlier this year. So check that out. And he put his own unique twist on it. So he alluded to what was going on in the first movie, but he allowed it to kind of flourish in its own right. And what we see here with Alien Earth really is he's taking a well-established franchise, and I would even say too that he's got his work cut out for him, because unlike the X-Men universe or Fargo, there's been a lot that's been done to the Alien franchise. I mean, my God, we only need to look at Prometheus and the other was it Alien. What was that Alien sequel that Ridley Scott did, where he introduced David and Walter kind of meddling around and killing the engineers, and I guess creating the xenomorph. So so Noah Hawley kind of has to work around it to kind of
Covenant was the name.
Covenant,
I couldn't think of for a second. Covenant.
Yeah, Covenant, where he kind of had to like dance around it, but while also being careful not to overdo or ignore what happened, right? But he was still able to put his own imprint on it while honoring the legacy of the original Alien movie, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also like the fact too, right, that if you think about it, right, since this is so chronologically close to the first one, it would make sense that like the technology, the sets, everything should look the same. So it's not only like you would want to do it to kind of celebrate like the original one, right? A lot of people would be like, oh, that looks a lot like it. I'm like, yeah, you would want to have someone go in there and really want to show that off. But it does make sense from a storytelling perspective. Everything's going to look identical because it's pretty much set at the same time frame. So yeah, it should look close. So I think that that's a fun detail as well when you think about what it looks like. So it's not just sitting there trying to rip apart like another piece of work, or he's not trying to like sit there and dangle some member berries in front of you. It makes sense within this universe.
Well, it's kind of if you think about it, it's kind of a shame that Ridley Scott didn't follow that rule, because when you look at Alien Covenant and Prometheus, it's not it doesn't really fit within the same
Yeah,
aesthetic
no.
as what you saw in the original
Yes.
Alien. So
Agreed.
so in a way, it's kind of ironic that Noah Hawley kind of has to take things back to basics, where Ridley Scott kind of forgot that a long time ago. You know.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So, so we kind of get like, everything with the crew, them coming out of their cryo sleep, and we kind of get kind of the look at the ship. And we get to meet the crew that's on the Maginot, I think was the name. I'm trying to remember now.
Maginot.
Maginot. Thank you. I totally dropped the ball with that one, but.
Well, if you think about it too, because a lot of the ships kind of end in an O sound, so Nostromo and Sulaco, so they're kind of keeping up with that theme,
Good call. Good point out for that. So, so we have them, kind of waking up while they're on the Maginot, and really that this was a mission to go find some life forms out in deep space, right? So that was their mission. So, you kind of get like the crew getting up and everything. They go into cryo sleep, and then this is where people kind of like wake up, and there's a whole lot of chaos that's happening, right? And what they do very interesting this episode, we kind of get the beginning and we get the end of what happens on the ship, right? So everything in the middle we don't know about, right? And that's actually saved for later, as you kind of pointed out, right? We'll get to that in episode 5. But I promise I'm not trying to skip around a whole lot with this. It really just opens up with them kind of like talking about some of the things that they're going through. And then we wake up and we have our sole survivor of this ship, right? Because it ends up crashing on Earth. And that is our cyborg Morrow, who is the security officer that's on the ship. So he is the sole survivor of the ship that ends up, it crash lands into New Siam, which is a city that's, I guess, like owned by Prodigy, right? So there's 5 big companies out there that like literally own like cities and everything like that. So Prodigy, we have, I think people will be very familiar with like Wayland and Utani. Prodigy is another one of those companies. So it kind of helps give you a little bit more lore in the Alien universe.
Well, let me ask you this, because in the text crawl it mentions that they're like humanity has developed, I guess, like 3 forms of immortality or something like that. Because you have the synths, which we're familiar with, but then they introduce cyborgs and they introduce hybrids. Yep. What were your thoughts on Noah Hawley introducing those 2 additional elements into into the Alien universe? Because for the longest time, we've been familiarized with synthetics, right? They're pretty much part of it, like Ash or Bishop or other characters like that. So what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with it, because I feel that's a very logical step in the world of what's going to happen, right? You have these synths, right, that are just totally like robots, right? They're totally automated. As far as that goes, cyborgs being, I would say people that have like modifications done. And I mean, I think that's a very logical thing, right? You have robots, right, that are there, that are fully synthetic, right, fully robot. And you have cyborgs, which are people that are going to, have bits and pieces of them upgraded by cyborgs, right? So, hey, you lose an arm, now you got yourself a cyborg arm. So, makes sense for that to happen. And then the hybrids, right, which we'll definitely get to, they're going to play a very big factor into this. And that is pretty much they take a human consciousness and they put it in a synthetic body. So I thought it was a cool thing to add. The only thing that kind of got to me is I felt like the story focused very heavily on that. And I was not as big of a fan of how they tried to show that. I thought that, when we're watching this, right, we're kind of used to like, hey, cool, we know this enemy, there's this xenomorph, and then we have some collection of good guys that are trying to kill it, right? It's always been a very simple premise. There's nothing too, like, I guess, thought-provoking with it. So it's cool to add other aspects of it. I just don't know if I felt like it kind of overshadowed the show a little bit, which I guess we'll talk throughout the description, but that would be my main qualm. Was I think they're cool additions. I just didn't want them to overshadow the monsters, which is what I was personally more interested in. What about you?
I thought it was a unique, a unique take because,
Yeah.
to your point, it makes sense just because Wayland Yutani and all these corporations, they build these, synthetic, beings in order to, run the day-to-day operations, whether it's in space or on Earth. I will say though, I do find it a bit distracting because now you're adding all these different players in the field where it's like maybe if you kind of just focused on like the hybrids more rather than introduce cyborgs. I kind of felt like it would make things a little less distracting.
Fair. Fair.
Because you've already got the mystery of the of the synthetics because they look so lifelike. You can't really tell who's synthetic or who's real, right? As we'll discuss later on in the episode. But I will say, like, I can understand why Noah Hawley introduced those elements in there. It's because, if you remember from Prometheus, Mr. Wayland is looking for a way to find immortality, right?
Yep.
That's one of his biggest, I guess, one of his biggest motivations in life is to try to find a way to live forever. So, again, props to Noah Hawley for picking up on that and kind of running with it. I just wonder maybe if the hybrids would take center stage if they were going that route, and maybe I don't know, maybe introduce Mr. Wayland as as a hybrid, as part of his quest to kind of achieve what he's been looking for. Granted, he did get killed at the end of Prometheus, but maybe like another member of the family kind of achieves what he wasn't able to accomplish in his lifetime.
Yep, very true, very true. So, but yeah, so we have the ship, right? It crash lands into this prodigy city, and I have to admit, right, when I saw that, I was super excited for that, right? Because to me, that's always been something I've wanted to see within the Alien franchise. I'm sure a lot of fans have this. What happens if xenomorphs were on Earth, right? And we do get that, but I would say it's a lot more, closed off than I was hoping for. I kind of wish they played more in the city, right? And then, what happens if a xenomorph was to, escape the quarantine and go out there and start laying eggs? I think there was a lot of cool things that they could have done. And, granted, that's just the way I would have addressed it. But I think that would have been, for me, a more interesting thing. I wish they spent more time in the city. But it wasn't meant to be, right? Kind of the story focuses on some other aspects. And, we see where most of the story takes place, right? We end up kind of shifting the story over to Prodigy's Neverland Research Island. So on this island, this is where we meet kind of our, I would guess, main cast of characters, right? Which is a group of terminally ill kids. And to your point, right, we kind of talked about this a little bit, is that so these kids, right, they're having their consciousness moved into synthetic bodies. So when we use the term hybrid, we're specifically talking about this group of characters, which are these kids that are injected into these synthetic bodies. And they're doing this all under the direction of the leader of Prodigy, right? This smart yet eccentric person named Boy Cavalier, right? Who, like I said, not how many times have you ever heard a smart eccentric person come up? So he's kind of got, I think if you've seen any depiction of those characters, you kind of know what it is. We get to meet the kind of the rest of the group, right? So Wendy is the first of the children to undergo this procedure. And I'm going to kind of call her, she's kind of the de facto leader of the group, right? So they're kind of called the Lost Boys because something for Cavalier, right? He really likes Peter Pan. So the character names are all taken from the Lost Boys from Peter Pan. So we're going to see tons of that type of discussion. So you'll notice the names. It was kind of interesting, though, because you have Wendy, who's not a Lost Boy, and actually one of the other characters is named Smee, who is also not a Lost Boy. So I didn't know what to think about that when I went through the names. I know that there's not a whole bunch of Lost Boys or a whole bunch of named Lost Boys, but it was kind of interesting. Like, hey, how do we come up with the name for all these characters and not all of them are Lost Boys? But yeah, so that is kind of what we're experiencing. So really kind of the story starts to take off because we see a group of rescuers going to the crash site, right, where the ship has crashed into this, I guess, like apartment complex, right? I couldn't really figure out what it was, right?
It's like I think it's like a huge apartment complex, but it was really, really big,
Yes, it is gigantic, right? So I'm just gonna call it apartment complex. So they crash land into this apartment complex, and one of the rescuers is Joe, and that is going to be Wendy's brother, right? Now Joe thinks that Wendy is dead, but Wendy has been kind of like keeping track of him, so we kind of know that she remembers Joe, and obviously had a close connection with them. The father had died, so she's been kind of, I would say, has a vested interest in this. So she sees that her brother is going to be going out to this crash site. So she kind of offers like, hey, you know what? Why don't I bring, myself and the rest of the Lost Boys? Why don't we go help at the accident?
Yeah, basically do a field test, basically.
Yes, yeah, to do a field test, which obviously, I think everyone could kind of read the room that, Wendy's wanting to do it for the brother more than anything. But yes, it is kind of under the guise of like, hey, cool, we're going to check out and see what these bodies can truly do. So the rescuers are going in there, and we see Morrow, right? So Morrow is the cyborg that was on the ship, right? He is trying to secure the ship now, and most importantly, secure all the cargo. However, during the crash, some of the cargo is missing now, which is not good for a lot of people. So we have Morrow. He ends up running into like two of the kind of first responders that show up there. He ends up tying them up in this room, and what unfortunately happens to them is we get to meet one of the new creatures, right? Which is this kind of like a tick-like alien that kind of sucks their blood and sucks them dry. Is the best way to put it, right? So and that's really how it ends, is our introduction to this new alien species. So that pretty much wraps up episode 1. So I'm gonna kind of give my thoughts as we go through each episode, because hey, I want to take it like an episodic approach, and kind of my thoughts as we go through it. And for me, the first one, I think it kind of hits everything I would want it to do, right? We get some really cool callbacks. We see more world building, which is always something very cool. We saw the xenomorph very briefly, so glad to see that in the episode. And they're introducing some new ideas, right? So we get some, we got this new alien species that's going to be introduced. And we also have the, hybrids, right, that are going to be here. So I think the first episode was a cool introduction. I guess as we kind of go forward, we'll talk more and more about that. But I mean, I think it sets up a lot of really cool ideas. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So Luca, first episode, hit us out here. What you got?
Well, I mean, as I was watching each episode, I kind of feel like Noah Hawley was using these episodes to kind of pay homage to the previous films of the franchise,
Yes.
right? So,
yes.
So we did a review of Alien Romulus last year. You can go ahead and check that out. But what I really find interesting, because you remember in Alien Romulus, the girl is trying to find a way to get off world, right?
Yes.
But they tell her, yeah, your contract is not up. You kind of have to stay and keep working, so sucks for you. And she really only has, I guess he's like an adopted brother or something who's been reprogrammed by the dad. Mm-hmm. So you can see elements of Alien Romulus kind of play out in episode 1, because the brother is also trying to find a way to get off, get out of his contract, but he's SOL basically. And Wendy, Wendy is his sister, but but she's in a different body now.
Yes.
She plays that protective role that that we saw in Alien Romulus. So I kind of feel like, besides paying attention to the aesthetics of the of the first Alien movie, he's also paying homage to all of the movies that came before, right? So what we see in episode 5 is definitely an homage to the original Alien movie. Just like in episodes 8 and 7 and 8, there's a bit of a Alien 3 quality to it, especially when you're talking about being in that confined space, right? So there's so much going on in there. It's like you kind of have to slow yourself down and kind of learn how to pick up on these things as you're watching, because he's throwing a lot at you, right? And let's make no bones about it. I mean, it does, yes, he is giving us a unique take on the Alien franchise, but there's still a responsibility on the viewer's part to be familiar with the Alien franchise overall, right?
Yes.
So it's not like you're being introduced to these creatures for the very first time, even though it's chronologically set before the first movie. You still have to be familiar with how the world is set up in order to appreciate what's going on, in the show, right? Now I will say this. So Boy Cavalier does have that assistant of his, Adam, that bald-headed guy in the suit. He is played by comedic legend Ade Edmondson, right? So I remember a few years back I sent you a link for The Young Ones, in which he starred as Viv, who's like this punk, student who's got spikes and everything all over the place. And Ade Edmondson was a huge comedy legend from way back then. He's got a career spanning 40 years. And it's something that I've noticed as I was watching, that a lot of comedic legends have been, cast in roles in these well-known sci-fi franchises, right? So remember we did a review of Fallout Season 1. Michael Rappaport was a member of the Brotherhood of Steel. Remember, before Titus kind of stole his suit and left him to die. And then we had Bill Burr, who played Riggs Mayfeld in The Mandalorian. And then Patton Oswalt, recently he was an episode of Star Trek. So so it is interesting to see a lot of these these great comedians kind of get cast into these iconic franchises just to see what they can do, because obviously these comedians, they're in their best element when they're doing comedic bits, right? But when you're doing something like Star Trek or Alien or Star Wars, obviously it requires a different approach, a different skill set. So I thought it was interesting how Ade Edmondson portrays the character of Adam in that show, because anybody who's watched his work, like anything from Bottom or The Young Ones or anything else, he's known for playing this physically comedic role. So to see him play things a bit more subdued, it kind of you kind of begin to see him in a more different light. It's like, oh, he's not just this guy who's running a set through a door, or getting hit by a car and then getting back up, and then
he's very subdued in this role, right?
Yeah,
very
exactly. and it kind of reminds, because keep in mind, this guy has a CV going back all the way to the early 80s. He kind of reminds me of another actress and comedian whom we've looked at recently in the Thunderbolts, and that's Julia Louis-Dreyfus, right? Because Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she started off a career in SNL, and then she achieved huge fame as Elaine on the sitcom Seinfeld, but then she also did other shows like Veep and The New Adventures of Old Christine before she entered the MCU. So I see a lot of parallels in the way that Ade Edmondson comes into a well-established franchise, just like Julia Louis-Dreyfus plays the Contessa in the MCU, or all the other comedians I mentioned being cast in these roles in these franchises, and you just think there's no way these people could ever pull off this role. But to see them act in such a way that is just so contrary, so different from the way that we normally see them, it's kind of gratifying in a way, because you get to see them And I would say it's kind of a challenge for them, because it kind of gives them the opportunity to show off their acting chops and just say, hey, I'm not just a comedian who just does, stupid things or say these silly lines. I can actually play it straight, and I can actually do it pretty well too. So I just wanted to mention that right at the beginning, because we are going to see more and more of Adam as we progress deeper and deeper into the review.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, because I definitely am not familiar with him. I remember you saying that about the young ones. But yeah, so yep, thank you. Was not aware of his kind of background, but good to know that, because that definitely will kind of shine a different light as we kind of talk about some of that. So, but yeah, that's the first episode. So we could go ahead.